But society in its wisdom has largely ignored prevention, so we are into the recovery phase for many species and for their habitats. If we look at southern Alberta, in the prairie area, most of Alberta's endangered and threatened species occur on this landscape, about 80% of them, and they are found in fragmented native habitats on the prairies, habitats like native grasslands and riparian areas. So we need to link stewardship programs to species at risk recovery needs, but how can you in stewardship groups do that? First of all, obtain range maps for species at risk, highlighting those species that are within the range of your stewardship program. Review the recovery plans that are available for each species, both provincial and national recovery plans. Look especially at the recovery objectives and the specific actions that are in those plans, and evaluate how well specific recovery actions could be integrated into your stewardship program. And then modify your stewardship program to include the species at risk recovery objectives and recovery actions that are feasible to include in your stewardship program. Refine your educational message. For example, incorporate species identification information into your presentations and your brochures. Try to come up with imaginative things like this tool, which equates the abundance of Sprague's pipits on grasslands to the forage production that a producer can expect in the upcoming year. Get and use any existing BMPs, beneficial management practice documents, or modify existing ones to provide to your program participants, and specifically focus them correctly, and I'll talk about that a little more later. Look for exciting participation opportunities, things like habitat enhancements, reestablishing native habitats, reintroductions of species into former parts of their ranges, locations for long-term monitoring and demonstration sites, and try to emphasize broad messages and management options that can benefit single or multiple species at risk across broad areas. Things like the production of native habitats, reduced pesticide use, increased community tolerance for the presence of keystone species and predators. As an example of the type of things you can do, these are the top 10 things that Alberta prairie ranchers could do for species at risk as portrayed in the booklet At Home in the Range, which is a stewardship booklet produced by Alberta Fish and Wildlife, Alberta Lands, Alberta Conservation Association, Nature Conservancy Canada, and Multisar through a cooperative effort a couple of years ago, and has now been taken up by Saskatchewan, and they've also produced their version of the booklet. If you're interested in this, it will be available at the Multisar poster, and I think the poster session is right after this out in the hallway there. So here's 1 to 5. Some of them are self-explanatory. Some of them might need a little explanation, which is in the booklet. And here are 6 to 10. So how would you know if stewardship is working for species at risk? What are we going to do to satisfy the critics who are saying we should only be managing species at risk through laws and regulations and court cases? First of all, programs would be on appropriate lands, in suitable habitat within the range of species at risk. Stewardship programs would be refocused towards priority single or multiple species at risk and their habitats. Programs would have a direct focus on the delivery of recovery actions that are identified in provincial and national recovery plans. Programs would actively be recommending appropriate management as described in beneficial management practices. Stewardship programs would incorporate regular monitoring so that their success could be tracked, allowing for revisions over time. And this involves questions like, is there uptake of the BMPs by cooperating landowners or industry? Is the recommended approach resulting in the habitat changes that are desired? Are the species at risk responding positively in the way that we predicted that they would? And are you allowing for the monitoring results to modify program design? So very briefly, some legal linkages. Stewardship is emphasized in the Federal Species at Risk Act throughout the Act and in most provincial and territorial acts. In Alberta, we are in the initial stages of developing a Species at Risk Stewardship Act, and work is underway towards identifying stewardship as a way to achieve effective protection for critical habitat through use of stewardship agreements such as renewable signed documents like letters of commitment showing an intent to manage according to a plan or a BMP, and in areas particularly where critical habitat may be static over space and time, the use of conservation easements. A little bit of advice and some precautionary notes. Stewardship programs involve risk. Legally binding conservation agreements can reduce that risk, but unless they're optional, they will also greatly reduce the voluntary participation in your program. Be careful. Broad-based endorsement of numerous species at risk recovery objectives and numerous BMP documents can be very risky and can lead to the wrong actions for the wrong species on the wrong part of the landscape. And in this way, you do need to have some professional involvement in your program and preferably do some specific evaluations so that you can set your objectives correctly. Thirdly, most of you will already know this. It's the same in any stewardship program. You can't ever walk away from a real-world stewardship program because the job is never done. And fourth, it's a good idea to develop examples showing mutual benefits through voluntary participation. In closing, I bring you back to my opening observations that in a store that is open for business, there is little tolerance for advice that could limit sales, and that those of us who are passionate about protecting wild things in natural areas are often perceived as being negative influences. However, there is a real strength in stewardship in that governments, communities, and industry all see stewardship projects in a positive light. They are good news stories. This provides a tremendous and positive opportunity for conservation and recovery of species at risk. And finally, I challenge you to formulate a single idea of a stewardship activity for species at risk that you would be able to use in your situation, whatever that is, as a volunteer steward, government professional, manager, industry leader, rural farmer or rancher, or a city dweller. And then just go and do it. Thank you.
Is Owen Williams, and Owen has over 35 years experience with the Ontario Ministry of Natural Resources. He started